Glenn Livingston, Ph.D., is a veteran psychologist and is the author of a hugely successful book, Never Binge Again, with over 500,000 Amazon Kindle downloads in the last 2 years. After a personal journey out of obesity, Glenn spent decades researching the psychology behind overeating and binge eating. His unique way of approaching food choices has helped countless individuals to develop a normal, healthy weight and a much more lighthearted relationship with food. This has transformed the lives of many individuals. He advocates eating whole foods, but not promoting a specific diet, rather helping people understand and overcome what leads to overeating and avoid it. Stay tuned on The Billionaire Lifestyle with Glenn Livingston, Ph.D.
Welcome to the Billionaire Lifestyle Podcast with your host, Emmett Muckles. Please visit iTunes, Stitcher, or emmettmuckles.com to listen to all the episodes for free.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Billionaire Lifestyle Podcast. I am your host, Emmett Muckles, who has raised a bunch of kids that don't have any genetic material of mine. But you know what they say? If you feed them long enough, they look exactly like you. And that's what life is about, community and building it. I am named after my father, who is named after his father. But that's enough about me. You guys know me. And I bring the best people to you. Today I have Glenn Livingston, Ph.D. And we're going to talk about the thing that plagues most Americans because we eat the worst soylent green that they make. And we're going to talk about how you should never have to binge again. And Never Binge Again is the book by Glenn Livingston, Ph.D. Hey, Glenn, how you doing?
I'm doing really well. I'm delighted to be here. Looking forward to it all week.
So, I always start with the story, the journey, because that is the most important. Because sometimes when you come across people, you may come across a doctor or somebody you might think they're only an academic. You never know their journey, how it relates to your own life. And how did you come to this point where I need to understand how diet and psychology affect us to where we're carrying more weight than we naturally would if we were in a more organic living environment?
Well, the answer in a word would be painfully. I had my own eating problems for 30 years. And I tried just about everything you could imagine to overcome them. I'm a psychologist from a family of therapists. So my mom and my dad, my sister, her husband, my mom's second husband, my father's second wife, my grandma, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins, they're all therapists. The standing joke in the family is that if something breaks, nobody knows how to fix it, but everybody knows how to ask it how it feels. So I've got a very psychologically oriented family. And sometimes when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And it's kind of important as you hear my story. So I'm 6'4", I'm reasonably muscular. And when I was about 17, I discovered that in combination with working out for 3 hours a day meant I could eat whatever I wanted to. You know, multiple pizzas, boxes of donuts, muffins, lattes, chocolate bars, whatever you could imagine. Yep. I could eat it. And I didn't think it was a problem. I thought it was a great thing. Other than the fact that I spent most of my time eating or working out, there didn't seem to be any issues. But fast forward a few years and I was married and I had responsibilities and patients and I was commuting a few hours each way every day. And I didn't have the time to work out, but I amazingly still found the time to eat. And I found I couldn't stop eating and thinking about food the way that I had been. So I got bigger and bigger. At one point, my highest weight is about 260 pounds on the scale, but I stopped weighing myself because I got embarrassed. I think I might have been up around 280. I don't know.
Wow.
And I'm hovering around 200 now. So the problem was not only the weight, because I carried it reasonably well. I didn't look that bad. the problem was that I was constantly obsessed with food. So I'd be sitting with a suicidal patient or with a couple right after an affair had been discovered. There's really high-risk situations. And most people think that maybe psychology is this intellectual profession where you take notes and you show people very carefully how this puzzle piece fits here and this puzzle piece fits there. And then they say, thanks, doc. Now I understand. I'll go fix my life.
Right.
But it's just not like that. You have to be emotionally present. You have to lend people your soul. And I couldn't do that, at least not as much as I wanted to, because my soul was thinking about when could I go to the delicatessen and dislodge my jaw.
Really?
Empty that.
You really had that deep of a connection with food?
I really did, Emmett. I really did. It was my life. Thankfully, I never lost anybody. Thankfully, I think out of the hundreds of couples I saw, only 2 of them got divorced. But yeah, I was obsessed with food, and it really bothered me. So when you got a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And I figured it must be a psychological cause, right?
Yeah.
It must be psychology. So I went to the best doctors in the area. This was in and around New York City. And coming from my family, I knew a lot of the best doctors. I went to psychiatrists and took medication. I went to Overeaters Anonymous for years at a time. And I learned a lot about myself in the process. Sometimes it would work for a little while, and then I would get worse. Mostly it did not solve the eating problem. It was very soulful. I learned a lot about myself, but it didn't solve the eating problem. Eventually, there were a few things that happened. Fast forward 20, 25 years, and I was coming out of Overeaters Anonymous, and I've been doing a lot of corporate consulting. I had a dual career. I don't have children, and I never commuted, so I had a lot of time to work on my career.
Okay.
And part of my career was consulting for Fortune 100 companies, a lot of them in the food industry. And I noticed that they were engineering these hyper-palatable concentrations of starch and sugar and fat and oil and excitotoxins, engineered to hit our bliss point without giving us the nutrition to feel satisfied. Right? That's part of what's going on. It's these foods have a life of their own. And if you look at the animal studies on what happens when you short circuit the pleasure machinery, if you put an electrode directly in a mammal's pleasure center and you let them self-stimulate with a lever, they'll forget about everything else and just push the lever thousands of times a day.
It's like a new kind of crack.
It's a new kind of crack, yeah. Yeah, they abandon their survival needs. A starving rat will ignore food.
Wow.
A nursing mother rat will ignore her pups. And you wonder why people say they don't like fruit or vegetables anymore. Well, I don't think anybody's putting electrodes in our brains, but is it a far cry to say we're being given these pleasure buttons when you walk out of a Burger King and across the street there's a McDonald's? Right?
You made me think of something. So there's this ritual my wife and I have. I don't really consume sugar, and I'm not a junk food person. As a matter of fact, I just came from the gym doing my 5x5. But I was introduced to this crack in the form of fruit snacks. Mm-hmm. And I will be upset because we have this ritual where we take our showers, we get in bed, we talk, and about 15 minutes into that talk, about 10 minutes before we go to sleep, where's my fruit snack?
Yeah. Yeah. Hand it over and nobody gets hurt.
Yeah. We're not going to have a problem if we have some fruit snacks.
Woman, don't be messing with my fruit snacks.
Right.
Yeah. That's the survival drive being hijacked. That's what happens. People feel like they don't get the natural pleasure from fruit and vegetables anymore. There's actually a process in the brain called downregulation. When you're presented with a supersized stimulus, and I imagine the fruit snack is a very dehydrated, concentrated form of...
Oh, it's so concentrated.
Yeah.
So flavorful.
Yeah. Well, we didn't have that in the tropics.
No,
right?
We didn't.
And there were no chocolate bars on the savannah.
No.
There were no potato chips or pretzels or even pasta or pizza on the savannah. It's an artificial form of pleasure. And some people will say, well, that's what society has to offer, and I want to enjoy that. You're welcome to. I would fight for your right to do that. I'm not telling anybody what to eat. What I am telling you is that if you have a fruit snack every day, that the natural sugar in a whole apple is not going to taste the same way to you anymore. Yep. It's like when I was in graduate school and I lived underneath the subway. At first, I couldn't imagine how I could sleep because it was so loud. 2 weeks later, I didn't even hear it.
Right.
Your brain downregulates. Sometimes it can downregulate so much that the fruit snack not only is available for pleasure, but it doesn't really make you feel pleasure anymore. It just makes you feel normal, and you feel displeasure when you don't have it. That's what happens. It's kind of like a drug. So part of my story was recognizing that I had an awful lot of industrial food in my diet, and I was craving an awful lot of things that I never would have had in nature or on the savannah. The other part was looking at the alternative addiction recovery literature. And there was a guy in particular named Jack Trimpey who wrote a book called Rational Recovery. And it was a life-changing book for me because it changed my paradigm. He was trying to love myself thin, nurture my inner wounded child thin. And what I got from his work was that you can't do that because the seed of addiction is in the lizard brain, in the reptilian brain. It's the earliest part of the evolved brainstem that's responsible for survival. And when the lizard looks at something in the environment, it assesses it on 3 levels. Do I eat it? Do I mate with it? Or do I kill it? Right?
You just described every guy that I know.
Yeah, the guys in the gym are kind of in an eat, mate, or kill.
Yeah, do I? That's so awesome.
Yeah. But that's the perspective that the reptilian brain operates from, and there's no love there. There's no concern for tribe or family or loved ones or spouses or children. It's eat, mate, or kill. All of that concern is more attributable to the mammalian brain, which either evolved or was put there by God, however you want to look at it, but it's superior to the lizard brain. And in mammals, there starts to be concern for tribe and family and loved ones. And the mammalian brain is able to inhibit the reptilian brain to say, before you eat, mate, or kill that thing, what impact is it going to have on those that you love? What impact is it going to have on your community? And then things like the more esoteric concepts of true love, long-term goals, spirituality, music, art, creativity, cooperation and contribution to society, community building itself. That's really much more in the neocortex. Those are much more human concepts. Those are what make us unique.
So that's the stuff that Freud and Maslow was talking about. That ascension up the pyramid to higher levels of consciousness are in the forebrain versus the reptilian brain. Yeah.
Yeah. And so if you want to self-actualize, and on a basic level, following your food plan or following a diet and becoming the kind of person that you want to be around food so that you're healthier, more long-lived, more able to contribute to the world, that's a form of self-actualization. And that really comes from the upper brain. That's where love is. But what happens in overeating is that the reptilian brain is stimulated. It's stimulated usually by this industrial food. Sometimes there are people who binge on broccoli, but mostly it's by all this industrial food. And the fight or flight mechanism goes into place, and it feels like an emergency, and every bone in your body says, I have to have that pizza. Who cares that I was planning to have a salad? Give me the pizza or I'm going to kill you. Right? And it really feels like that. So the first tip is that you have to remember that feelings aren't facts, and that you're going to have to make some intellectual decisions about what's best for you. And it's not going to feel like the right thing to do at the moment.
Right.
So what is it? Okay. Let me just kind of bring it full circle into what really worked for me.
That's fine.
The last piece of the puzzle for me was that I did my own study. I did a 40,000 person study, and this was my last ditch effort to figure out how to love myself then. Even though I was starting to recognize that I couldn't. I had to be more like an alpha wolf dominating a challenger. Right? Because when a challenger in the pack comes up to challenge the alpha wolf, The alpha wolf doesn't say, oh, what's the matter? Aren't you feeling loved enough? Here, let me give you a hug, right? The alpha wolf snarls that thing down and says, get back in line or I'll kill you.
Yep.
It's a game of ruthless domination. Well, my last ditch effort to love myself then was to do this 40,000 person study over a couple of years on the internet, back when the internet clicks were cheap. And I asked people what foods they had trouble abstaining from once they started and what was going on in their life. What areas of life were they happy with? What areas of life were they stressed with? A couple of personality variables. And I found three really interesting things. People who started their binges with chocolate and couldn't stop eating chocolate, like me, that's what I always went to, they tended to be lonely or brokenhearted. People who struggled with crunchy, salty things like chips and pretzels and potato chips, they tended to be stressed at work. And people who struggled with soft, chewy, starchy things like pizza or pasta or bread or bagels tended to be stressed at home. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting. Now all I have to do is ask people what do they struggle with, and I'll know what to work on. And then I thought the problem would be solved. But I started with myself. And I can tell you this didn't work up front, but it's really interesting. And I said, okay, I was kind of in a bad marriage, and I was lonely and brokenhearted. So I thought that made sense. But I asked my mom, who raised me and was a therapist, and I figured she would know something. So I said, Mom, why in the world do I run to chocolate when I feel lonely or brokenhearted? And Mom, I think you have trouble with chocolate also. Do you resonate with this? And she gets this look on her face like she'd seen a ghost or something. She's like, honey, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And I said, what? She said, well, when you were about 1 year old, my father, your grandfather, had just gotten out of prison. And he was actually guilty, and I didn't know that he was doing those kinds of things. And I idolized this man. I held on to him for dear life because my mother was horrible, and he was actually guilty, and I was horribly depressed. At the same time, your father was a captain in the army, and they were talking about sending him to Vietnam. And I thought, great, I'm going to be a single mother with another one on the way, and I'm not going to have a husband because he's going to get killed in Vietnam, and I'm not going to have a dad because he's a criminal. And so I was horribly depressed, and I didn't have the wherewithal to feed you and love you and hug you when you came running to me for food. And what I did was I got a small refrigerator and I put it on the floor. And I kept a big bottle of chocolate Bosco syrup in the refrigerator. And I'd say, honey, go get your Bosco. And you'd go running over to the refrigerator and you'd pull out the chocolate Bosco syrup and you'd suck on the bottle and you'd go into a chocolate sugar coma.
That's early therapy, huh?
That was my early history, yeah. And Emmett, if this were the movies, then at that point, Mom and I would have a big cry and a big hug. We'd forgive each other, and I'd never have trouble with chocolate again.
Right.
Well, we did have a big hug and a big cry. This is over Skype, so it was metaphorical, but we did have a big hug and a big cry. And I did learn a lot about her that I wouldn't have learned otherwise. I learned a lot about myself that I wouldn't have learned otherwise. I felt softer towards myself. I forgave myself, and that was helpful. But my eating actually got worse. I started having more chocolate. Any guesses as to why?
No.
Because there was this voice inside me. It was a voice of justification, and it went something like this.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, Glenn, you know what? You're right. Your mama didn't love you enough, and she left a great big chocolate-sized hole in your heart. And until you can find the love of your life, you're going to have to go right on binging. Yippee, let's go get some more right now. And so my reptilian brain was seizing hold of this false logic. It was projecting this voice into my head that justified my breaking my best laid plans. And that's when everything kind of clicked for me. And I said, okay, so it's kind of like I'm addicted to a drug. I mean, no one says food is a drug, but you know, these concentrations of pleasure don't exist in nature. And I'm actually getting high with the food. There's when you have sugar, there's an 18-minute high, and then there's a corresponding crash for several hours while your blood sugar tries to normalize.
Oh, yeah, I know that one really well.
Fruit snack man, right?
Oh, it's so beautiful.
And this is embarrassing. But what I did, I made kind of a Hail Mary shot. I said, nothing else seems to be working. This is really crazy. What if I make a rule that draws a very bright line between what is pig slop and what is healthy food. I'm going to say anything, for example, I will never have chocolate Monday to Friday again. I'll only ever have chocolate on the weekends. It's a very clear, bright line.
Yep. And
if I heard a voice in my head saying that I wanted chocolate for any reason whatsoever, I would say, well, that's my pig squealing. My inner reptilian brain, I'm going to call that my pig. I'm a sophisticated psychologist. I was never going to publish this. This was just going to be a little journal I kept myself. A whole series of events caused me to publish it. But that's my pig. The chocolate itself is pig slop on a Wednesday or so. I don't eat pig slop, and I don't let farm animals tell me what to do. And after 30 years of big scientific studies and research and, tens of thousands of dollars spent on doctors and nutritionists and years in Overeaters Anonymous with sponsors and everything, that's what started to work for me. It wasn't a miracle, but what it did was that at the moment of impulse, it gave me a few extra microseconds to wake up. I remember who I was and how I wanted to be with that food.
So basically, you had to have a conversation with yourself, yeah. And we are constantly having conversations with other people, advising people what to do. But, many people never just sit down and have a dialogue with themselves. My mom used to say this thing, if someone was talking to themselves, she's like, okay, long as they don't answer themselves, they're not crazy.
Right.
But I need to augment that and say, yes, you should answer yourself and be honest with the conversation, because you need to talk to yourself like you're your friend.
Well, yes and no. The conversation is necessary in the beginning, but only so you can recognize what's going on. And at that point, you can ignore this piece of you, because see, when the reptilian brain has been hijacked by industrial products, it's not your friend. It's not your inner wounded child. It's not a cute puppy dog that you want to nurture back to health. It's more like your testicles or your bladder. It generates very powerful urges. Like, I don't know about you, Emmett, but if you see an attractive woman in the street, do you run up and kiss her?
No, but yeah, I understand. I love women. You use a perfect metaphor.
Oh, okay. Or if you're at your mother-in-law's house and your bladder is really full and it's really pressing to go, you don't just pee in the living room, right?
No.
It's a bodily organ that generates a biological urge, and that biological urge needs to be channeled and sublimated and expressed in a very particular way at a very particular time, or we can get in a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with the urge to overeat.
That's a good one. I've had this conversation with myself and with others, particularly my wife. We do a lot of conversating about this, that, and the other. And I said this to her. I was like, everybody's kind of jacked up. I was like, but the difference is between the people who are truly evil and the people who are not, is that the people who are considered evil act upon things that they think that they know are not correct. Or they may not know it, but that's the difference, is the action you take from your thoughts.
Yeah. There's a difference between psychology and religion in a lot of ways, where psychology recognizes that all thoughts are okay to have. You can recognize them. You can recognize the urge, as long as you know that you don't have to act on them. And it's the actions that we take that define our character and the kind of person we are in the world.
Yep.
So that's how I recovered. I had to experiment with different rules and systems. I eventually recognized that rules were much better than guidelines. I can explain to you why that is if you're curious. But I came up with different types of rules, like things I would never do, things that I would always do, things that I would only do in certain conditions. And I then had to figure out how to forgive myself if I did make a mistake.
Yeah.
It was harder than I thought it was going to be.
I want to ask you about when you're dealing with someone who has a addiction to food, and it's not really their fault. We are the products of over-chemicalization, which means our food has been made so that we do form these addictions to them, whether slight or overt, because they're unnatural. And I'm going to give you an instance for a weight challenge that I went through accidentally. I went to Austria and I was there for 2 weeks. While I was in Austria, I ate on average 4 full meals a day. I drank great numbers of schnapps and beer at each one of those. And I came back to the United States thinking I was just going to be the pudgiest me I had encountered in 2 weeks, and had lost 2 pounds.
Wow.
And I spoke with my wife about this. I was like, how is that possible? If I did that same thing here, I probably would have gained 5 to 10 pounds. She says, the difference is Austria has a very strict protocol for how their food is produced. You can't put so many. First of all, it's locally sourced, most of it, and you can't put so many products in it that aren't native to that, such as preservatives and fillers and things of that nature, and extra sugars. She says, so you are basically eating as close to as natural as you probably would have if you were a human 100 years ago in America. I was like, whoa. And that really changed my attitude on food, where I try my best. Oh, it goes in spurts, where I try my best to eat whole foods, which means foods that we would have eaten 150 years ago, or foods that don't come in a can, don't come in plastic. I try my best to eat those. And it's helped me to maintain a certain level of weight, because for me, you don't see the weight come on. It's not until you see a picture of yourself. And I've heard this from many people, like, I didn't know I was that fat.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I'm still suffering. I look at pictures and I go, man, I was a portly little guy.
Denial isn't a river in Egypt. But I wholeheartedly agree with you that in our culture, people are made to feel ashamed of something that's not really their fault. That doesn't mean that we can't take responsibility and be constructive and proactive about how to fix the problem. But look at what's happening. First of all, I told you what's happening in the food industry. Mm-hmm. What you don't... A lot of research that goes into packaging, and people know, the industry knows what type of packaging makes things look healthy. I talked to the VP of a major food bar manufacturer that I was consulting for, and they said the most profitable insight that they had was to take the vitamins out of the bar because they were too expensive and they were making it taste worse, and put the money into the packaging instead to make it look vibrant and nutritious. So they had a diversity of colors, and they made them very bright and shiny, and they put them on the package. And that tricks the brain into thinking that there's a diversity of nutrients available. So you've got the food that's engineered to hit your bliss point without the actual nutrition to make you feel satisfied. You've got the packaging to fool you into thinking that it's perfectly healthy for you and that you need it to survive. Then you've got billions of dollars that go into advertising. It's 5,000 to 7,000 messages about food beamed at you every year. Maybe a half dozen of them are about fruits and vegetables, like whole fruits and vegetables.
That's true.
And then you have the addiction treatment industry saying that you can't abstain even if you wanted to. You couldn't quit even if you wanted to. The best you could do is abstain one day at a time. You're powerless. You have a disease. This is a perfect storm. I don't know how anybody eats well in our culture. You look at the food, you look at the advertising, you look at the messages of powerlessness that you get from the industry and the culture. Where are you supposed to turn? And so I think we should be turning shame into anger. Like, remember the movie Network? Did you ever see the movie Network? It's an old movie. Maybe I'm
from the 70s.
Yeah.
Where the guy had the rant at the end.
Yeah.
I saw pieces of it.
Yeah, he was a newscaster, and he's really mad, and he says, "I want you all to go to your windows and open the window and yell, 'I'm mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore.'" Well, I don't necessarily want you to do that. I don't want to incite a riot, but I want you to get mad. I want you to look at what's happening in the industry. I want you to recognize that you have a choice, that you can define clear lines for yourself, that you can then, as you're starting to relinquish some of the industrial foods, you can replace them with whole, fresh, ripe, raw, and natural foods that give you the nutrition to feel satisfied, and that your body will adjust. We talked about the principle of downregulation before, where a natural apple is not going to taste good to you if you have all this artificial food. There's also a principle of upregulation. If you get some of that unnatural food out of your diet, your body's going to start to adjust and think that it needs the natural food again, and apples are going to start to taste better to you. You're not going to get high in the same way as you do with the chocolate bar, but you're going to start to be able to taste the subtle differences in the flavor between Fuji versus Gala versus Envy apples, all the different species. And you're not going to, your inner lizard, your inner pig will say you're going to suffer forever, but it's not true. 4 to 8 weeks later, there's research that says that your taste buds double in sensitivity. You're going to go even further than that. You're probably no more than 100 days from feeling free of this if you could just get through those 100 days. And the worst part is the first 100 hours. So.
You know, one of a practice that I did, because in the last, I think it was March, I was just feeling heavy and bleh. And I went on a 4-day juice fast. Mm-hmm. And years ago when I first started juicing, I remember my first episode, I took a bunch of carrots and just juiced them down. And I was like, wow, carrot juice is really sweet. It tastes nothing like the V8 thing.
Yeah, right.
And it's really full. It had like a milky kind of full sweet flavor to it. But I'm digressing on that. But I started off with this 4-day juice cleanse, and it was a little difficult. It wasn't hairy or anything like that. You know, I felt hungry, and then I didn't. And I was just drinking the juice. I could put a fire out, you know, by the end of the first day because I drank so much juice.
Yeah.
But it really reset my body. And after that, weight just started pouring off because I was about 220 pounds at 6 foot. And I'm relatively muscular. But I was looking at my face and I was like, wow, I'm so puffy. And I had tried everything. I've been working out. I've been doing cardio. I've been doing this. And I was like, I'm just going to try this one last thing just to reset my gut because it is such a huge organ. And after that, the weight started flowing off because, and my wife who has Crohn's, she was like, here's probably what happened. You got rid of a lot of the crap that was inside of you. So now your body could absorb the nutrients it actually needs and pass those along the line that you don't need. So you're doing your body a favor with this little reset that you did. And then compounding with that, we began a more vegetable-based eating regime versus going vegan because I like my eggs.
Yeah.
And, you know, but sometimes you have to test your body when you want to achieve a goal, or you have to try different things because, you know, one of the things I think another guest said that we don't eat how we are for our genetics because, particularly in America, because some of us came from such different places where we had a diet that worked because genetically our families had been used to it. And now we're introduced to all this plethora of deliciousness that has no calories. I mean, that has no nutrients, but a bunch of calories. So no wonder we're fat.
Yeah. Yeah. But it gets easier. It gets easier. What I like to tell people is to try to make one rule. Think about your single worst trigger food or behavior. You know, like it might be fruit snacks for you, Emmett. Oh. For other people, it could be eating standing up. They could say, I'll never eat standing up again. Some people, it could be putting their fork down between bites so they don't shovel it in too quickly.
Yeah.
For some people, they need to come up with something they're always going to do. Like I'm always going to write down a hypothetical food plan for the day in the morning, just so I can plan out and spot any trouble spots. I'm sorry about that. I'll turn that off.
Oh no, I barely hear audible.
Okay. So what I like people to do is come up with a rule. And there's a reason that rules work better than guidelines. In our culture, we're taught that we should eat well 90% of the time and indulge 10% of the time. You know, everything in moderation and you know, just be bad 10% of the time. And in theory, there's nothing wrong with that. It's kind of a good North Star to shoot for. But the problem with it is that it requires constant decision making.
Yeah.
Every time you're in front of a chocolate bar, if you say, I avoid chocolate 90% of the time, you have to ask yourself, is this part of the 90% or is it part of the 10%? And the problem with that is that willpower is not like an on and off switch or some genetic gift that some people have and others don't. It's more like gas in the tank. And what burns that gas is making decisions, not just decisions about food. If I ask you to do math problems first, you're going to have more trouble resisting a marshmallow than if I don't make you do it before I show you the marshmallow. Mm-hmm. So you want to minimize decision making, and rules minimize decision making's, guidelines don't. So instead of saying, I avoid chocolate 90% of the time and having to make a decision in front of every chocolate bar at Starbucks, you say, I'll never eat chocolate Monday through Friday again. Now all your food decisions, all your chocolate decisions are made Monday through Friday, and you're not wearing down your willpower day in and day out.
Yeah.
When you look at it, this seems like some people say, well, what are you, a food Nazi? You're coming up with all these really stupid things. And I take exception to that remark, because if you think about it, what we're really advocating is building character. Character is the habitual response that we have to temptation in a particular environment in our lives without even thinking about it. So if you walk into a diner and there's a $10 bill on the table and the waitress says, I'll be right back, I just have to get your menu, and she didn't see her tip. And there's no window, there's nobody up front, there's no video camera, nobody would see you take that $10 bill. I would bet my left kidney that you wouldn't take it because you're not a thief. Most people I ask in that situation will say they would never take it. It doesn't require any willpower. I'll say, why? Because I'm not a thief. That woman worked hard for her money. It's not the kind of person I am. So as a matter of character, you abstained from a particular pleasurable interaction, which you could have gotten away with 100% without even thinking about it. Why can't you do that with food? Why can't you say, I'm just not kind of the person, I'm not the kind of person who eats chocolate during the week? Turns out you can. And it turns out that we make those decisions of character all day long. We just don't know it. This is why we don't kiss attractive people in the street. This is why we don't kick policemen in the tush. This is why we don't pee in our mother-in-law's living room. This is why we make vows and keep them with our spouses, and we don't say, gee, honey, I know we're getting married and I'm 90% sure that I can avoid all those other people out there, but there sure are a lot of attractive women. I don't want to lie to you. I'm just being honest. We expect a 100% commitment in certain areas, and we can make that level of commitment with food. If you do happen to make a mistake, see, most people are afraid of that level of commitment with food because they're afraid they're going to make a mistake and beat themselves up with guilt. Well, it's okay to feel a little bit of pain. It's okay to feel a little psychological pain when you make a mistake, because you're trying to accomplish something of character. You're trying to implement a sacred rule that you made for yourself. And in the physical world, if you didn't feel pain, you'd be in trouble. If you touch a hot stove and you don't feel it, you're going to be in trouble because you're going to leave your hand on it. And there are physical disorders in this world where children can't feel pain, and they rarely live past 4 or 5 years old because they just don't learn how to not get hurt.
Oh.
So there's a function of psychological pain. Guilt serves a function. Shame serves a function. The problem is when you get over involved with it. The function of the guilt or the shame is to draw your attention so that you say, well, how did I miss that stove there? What am I going to do to avoid touching the stove in the future? Once you figure that out, you're supposed to let go of the pain. You're supposed to let go of the guilt and shame. What you're not supposed to do is say, oh my God, I am a pathetic hot stove toucher. I might as well put my whole hand down and just leave it there because there's no hope for it. Yeah. You see, it turns out, and this is a very important point, that the perseveration and over-involvement with guilt and shame is motivated by your pig. It's motivated by the lizard brain. It wants to beat you down so that you feel too weak to resist the next binge, right? And it wants you to feel like the only pleasure in life is that next binge. So if you took nothing away from this interview besides the idea that it's very difficult to keep overeating if you refuse to yell at yourself, then I would have done my job.
So let me ask you about the subliminal barraging that most people have to deal with. And this is on several different levels. It's just so that we're talking about food. Mm-hmm. But there's this psychological peer pressure that, unbeknownst to us, that is just constantly being shot at us in the form of media, advertising, wherever you go. How much of a factor does that play into this as well?
Until you make a decision, it plays a big factor. Most people think advertising doesn't affect them, but it affects you more when you think it doesn't affect you because your sales resistance is down. If I were to subliminally slip in, go have pizza, you love pizza, every other word in a little microsecond that you couldn't hear into this interview, you get off this interview thinking, I really need a piece of pizza. However, if you had made a rule for yourself that says, I never eat pizza, or I only ever eat pizza the last Saturday of the month, or whatever it is, then it wouldn't matter what your feelings were, because the impact of subliminal advertising is to create an urge. It can't create the behavior. No matter what urge you feel, nobody can force you to do something that you've decided you won't do as a matter of character. People are frightened of hypnosis, thinking that the hypnotist can make them do things that they wouldn't want to do, but you can't make someone do what they don't want to do with hypnosis. It's just not possible. So, yes, it creates the urge. No, it doesn't create the behavior if you decide where to draw the line.
All right. So, where can everybody find your information, find your videos? Are you having talks? How can people gain more knowledge from you?
I've got a lot of things to offer. Most of them are free. So if you go to the site, neverbingeagain.com, and you click the big red free bonus button, you sign up for the reader bonuses list, I will get you a copy of the Kindle, Nook, or PDF book for free. Those are the digital versions. If you want the paperback version, it'll tell you where to get that too, but there's a charge for that. Yep. There's also a charge for the Audible version. But in addition to that, I'll give you two more things. One is a set of recorded coaching sessions, because I know this sounds weird in principle. When we talk about it in theory, and they're thinking, Emmett, you brought this psychologist out who's got a pig inside of him, and he doesn't eat pig slop, and he doesn't let farm animals. What's wrong with you? Like, have you blown a fuse?
No, they know me by now. They know me by now. They know nothing is limited here.
Okay. So I recorded some sessions with people that I want you to hear, so that you can see that this is a life-giving, enthusiasm-producing, despair-reducing process that improves people's self-esteem, makes them feel like they've got power and responsibility where they used to feel hopeless and despairing.
Good.
The third thing I have is a set of food plan starter templates. This is all free. And we have one for any particular diet, because I'm not going to tell you what to eat. This is diet agnostic. So there's one for paleo. There's one for point counters. There's one for macrobiotic. There's one for, vegetarians. There's one for ketogenic people. There's a food plan starter template for just about any dietary philosophy that you want to follow. I call it a starter template because I've discovered if I tell you what to eat, your pig will eventually say, that doctor's diet's no good. We're going to have to find another one. But until we do, let's just go binge, yippee. So all at neverbingeagain.com, click the big red button and sign up for the free bonus list.
So are you doing any talks, any public appearances?
I'm doing a lot of radio these days. I was just on a major CBS radio affiliate that's being syndicated across the country. That'll be out in a couple of weeks. I am planning to go to London in March to give a talk, but mostly we have an online coaching network if people want services. There is a charge for that, but it's affordable. Okay. And you'll be led to that when you go to neverbingeagain.com and sign up for the reader bonuses. We have individual coaching. We have a coach training program. If you're a personal trainer or a nutritionist or a doctor or psychologist or someone that's already working with clients, or even if you're not and you want to know how to do that, then we have a training program where we can help people. That's what we do. We coach people and we train them to coach others.
Awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been the Billionaire Lifestyle. Doc, I want to thank you for being on the show.
Thanks, man.
Now, let's get to the end part. You know that you are a miracle. And I want you to really think about this. It wasn't easy to make you. It wasn't easy for you to be a human being, to be an adult, or even to be a teenager, or even to make it as like a 10-year-old. A lot of people don't make it in this world. They come into the world, but they literally don't make it. So this is why I want you to really appreciate yourself. When you get out the shower, I want you to sit back and wipe the fog off the mirror and just take some time and just study yourself. Look at the wrinkles. Like for me, my neck is a little jacked up, so my head always looks like it's crooked. I got these little moles on my face. But you know, that's me. And you should do the same thing. You should just look at what a miracle you are. 30 days after 2 cells met and began this relationship of replication, you were 1 billion cells. 2 to the power of 30 is 1 billion. And you've just grown exponentially from there. And you've maintained. That's not easy. Like a couple hundred years ago, it was a hard road. And get close to a mirror and look at those nebulae/galaxies that are in your head next to that canal that brings life in the form of air into you. And revel in the fact that as above, so below. Everything is fractal. And when you meet someone who has very similar characteristics, they don't have to be the exact. Treat them with love, honor, and respect. Because remember, we are Hue, H-U-E, -man, in the image of, and we're beings, which we're having an experience. So go live your life, be in love, be in peace. Love you all. Till next time, I'm out. Deuces.